Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the community-focused approaches for mental health and resilience of Kion Foundation. We will wait for a few more seconds so more people can join, and then I will officially start the webinar. Okay. Welcome again. This is the second session of our series named Community-Focused Approaches to Mental Health and Resilience. Kion Foundation is a nonprofit organization registered in New York with the main goal of promoting health and human rights for people in crisis. Kion was initiated in support of Women Life Freedom Movement in Iran, and is named after Kian Pir Falak, an amazing 10-year-old boy who was killed over the Women Life Freedom protests in Iran. The mission of Kian is to promote health and human rights for people in crisis worldwide through education, empowerment, advocacy, and support. Kian strives to build capacity and provide access to resources and assistance to those in need, while amplifying the voices of the people in crisis and fostering a culture of respect, inclusion, and justice for all. So if you have been following our series of events, we put together a very interesting and diverse series of talks about different aspects of community-based approaches and community promotion strategies for mental health and resilience for vulnerable populations and in crisis and in general. For our second session, we invited Mr. Jess Kohler, who is the Executive Director of CTIPP, Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. Jess serves as CTIPP's Executive Director. He is in loan from Change Campaign, which is a nonprofit organization he founded. Change Campaign is a multi-pronged initiative to build community and systemic capacity by facilitating the application of the science of developmental adversity and its progression through the lifespan and generations to enable initiatives that improve holistic well-being and provide a strategic supporting to government agencies and organizations focused on aligned areas. So the topic of today's talk is promoting trauma-informed community change. So without further ado, I will turn over to Jess, and we are looking forward to hear your amazing talk.
Thanks so much, Reza. Here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And were you able to see the slides?
Not yet. So we see a different screen.
Oh, apologies. Take two on that.
That is perfect.
Wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I am grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit more about the work we do at CTIPP. And as Reza said, my name is Jesse Kohler, and I truly have the privilege of getting to serve as CTIPP's executive director. Trauma-informed approaches to community change have been shown to be impactful in a variety of contexts. I'll dive into CTIPP's toolkit on trauma-informed community change, as well as work that we are doing to build population-level resilience through community-led action in advance of widely traumatizing events, such as the impacts of the climate, ecosystem, and biodiversity catastrophe that we are currently experiencing globally. But before I get there, I'm going to quickly speak to the need for trauma-informed approaches as we work to create healthier systems so that all individuals, families, and communities have the opportunities and supports necessary to thrive. Trauma is an interesting term. You know, throughout the past generation or so, it's been going through a transition from being a clinical term to more of an everyday term, at least in some cultures. There are many definitions of trauma, but when one experiences overwhelming stress and chronic adversity that makes changes to the way we think, feel, and behave, I think it certainly fits into the context of what we are talking about. It's important to note that trauma-informed approaches and systems can be supportive even for those who are not experiencing trauma. At the root cause of so many issues our society is grappling with, we find trauma. When there is a root cause of a linked set of public health outcomes, it's called a syndemic. So frequently, we deal with each of these issues by themselves. And this work is critical to address the stresses that our society faces from each of these issue areas. But we must also address the root cause to transform society toward one that does not perpetuate such horrible outcomes, which is why trauma-informed approaches are necessary. When we talk about trauma, the focus is often on the individual. Too frequently, we only put the onus and burden of well-being on individuals and fail to recognize how traumatized systems, which perpetuate stress and adversity disproportionately on marginalized people and groups of people, that promote the negative outcomes at the individual level that we are working to address. Policy has the power to create conditions that allow for people to thrive. Of course, we know that far too frequently the opposite is done, and policies create conditions that lead to harm and perpetuate trauma. But this is why we do the work that we do, so that all individuals, families, and communities have the opportunities and supports necessary to thrive. To create conditions that ensure that we are making lives better across the social ecological framework, as we saw on the last slide, we need to take a public health approach. Too frequently, our systems promote a treatment-first mentality. While we must pay mind to treating the needs that exist today, we must also work to intervene as early as possible and most powerfully prevent as much harm as possible before it occurs. If we do not have a proactive approach that matches our reactive efforts, we will ensure that more of the same problems that we are facing today continue into the future. We cannot treat our way out of the problems that we face today. We must address the root causes and work upstream to prevent as much as possible. While a lot of times it is difficult to imagine or measure what we keep from happening, it is not impossible, and we have seen many examples of community being the medicine that we need, perhaps none more powerfully measured than what has become known as self-healing communities, which is a report that highlights the work of the Washington State Family Policy Council from 1994 to 2011. In the last 12 years of their work, they trained more than 40 communities in a combination of trauma-informed approaches and systems thinking, as well as sustained investment in said communities to allow the work to continue, which set into motion a set of positive outcomes across the communities that they worked with. Their belief was that leaders existed throughout communities, and they worked to nurture and expand that leadership throughout the community so that folks brought into the process for the long term. Their focus was on addressing the root causes of several problematic outcomes that the state was facing, and their focus was on community-led plans that they held the communities they worked with accountable to, while promoting learn-going and ongoing development of those plans that communities had as time went on, and they learned what was working and what wasn't working. The work looked different across the various counties that they worked with. And again, they were focused on addressing the root causes of several problems, not just putting the money directly into the symptoms of the problem, but instead finding systemic solutions to what was driving the problems in the first place. For example, one community found that the lack of transportation led to a lack of economic opportunities. So they developed a plan to put in a new bus stop that was closer to their community that could bring in residents to places that jobs were more accessible and plentiful. Across the communities that they worked with, as you can see on the charts on the right side of the screen, they outperformed the communities that opted out of working with the Family Policy Council widely. In one county, they reduced youth suicide and suicide attempts by 98%, while also decreasing juvenile justice system involvement in birth to teen parents, as well as increasing high school graduation rates by about half. By centering community decision-making and building what they called general community capacity, they created tremendous outcomes across the communities they worked with, and therefore widely throughout the state. And as you can see on this slide, in addition to and because of the remarkable outcomes discussed on the prior slide, and many more that were accomplished, they generated more than $1 billion in cost avoidance over the lifespan of this work. You can see on the screen how this cost avoidance was measured. What we know is that if this work had continued beyond just the 17 years that were done by the Family Policy Council, which again was predominantly focused on a 12-year period following the publishing of the ACEs study, though we cannot ignore the readiness and the relationships that were developed in the first 5 years of their work and how that enhanced the work over the last dozen years. there was a measured cost avoidance that equaled greater than 35x on its return on investment. This work is important on a number of levels, and the fact that it cannot just economically sustain itself, but also scale over time and work to create opportunities for investment in other important areas is incredibly important. We know that if this work had continued longer, the return on investment would have been exponentially higher. At the 20 to 30-year marks, when children who were born into this work started to have children of their own, we would anticipate a reduction in the transmission of intergenerational trauma, which would have transformative effects, and that would be true for many generations in the future. It creates a transformative vision for where this work can lead. So how do we start with this work in different communities? First, we want to think about how we operationalize these 6 principles from SAMHSA's framework when we are doing trauma-informed work. Being trauma-informed is not just about labeling ourselves as such. It is a commitment to an ongoing process of learning and growth based in these principles and others that are important to the community that we are working alongside and with. How do we promote safety, including physical safety, as well as psychological, social, and moral safety? Are we being transparent and earning others' trust, or do we simply demand it due to power imbalances? Are we creating conditions of empowerment, voice, and choice so that folks are genuinely able to engage and contribute in meaningful ways to the best of our ability? Is true collaboration occurring, and do people feel valued? In what ways are we perpetuating oppressive cultures and marginalizing any person or group of people, whether intentionally or unintentionally? And are we building a culture in which we are provided with skills to support ourselves? And are we building communities so that peers feel as though they are equipped and able to support others as well? We will never be perfect in doing this, but I believe that being trauma-informed is in the pursuit of living into these qualities more than it is boasting that we have achieved them. Being trauma-informed requires a commitment to an ongoing process of learning and growth guided by these 6 principles and others that are shared values of the community and culture that we are embedding this work within. And if you remember with the Self-Healing Communities report, in addition to the trauma-informed approaches, they also found that it was incredibly important to address community-level change through systems thinking. Frequently, we try to address problems with linear thinking, believing that if we do X, then Y outcome will occur. Humans and communities are not this simple. While this thinking may be good for simple processes, when doing community work, we are dealing with complex systems. That does not mean that every problem itself or solution itself rather needs to be complex. However, simple solutions must be developed with an understanding of the complex ecosystems that they are being embedded in if they are going to be successful in the long run. The map above, not that easily viewed on this slide, I know, is a systems map to address adverse childhood experiences and trauma by Vu et al. That they did looking at what's called the Rural Opportunities Institute, and you can find this report on ResearchGate. You will see that systems are impacted by forces that heal, unexamined beliefs, unexamined responses, indicators of health, and various biases such as racism that interplay a complex dynamic that drive the cycles of trauma. When we pull together systems thinking and the trauma-informed principles discussed on the last slide at a minimum, in addition to other important processes highlighted by the community, we create a powerful foundation from which to move forward. While this was pretty high level, let's dive into CTIPP's toolkit highlighting trauma-informed community models more deeply. This report contains an in-depth look at what helps and hinders the development of trauma-informed community change. We know that trauma-informed work in communities will look different across each community based on its populations, needs, resources, and desires. So this guide does not prescribe specific action, but pulls out promising and emerging practices and otherwise synthesizes existing research to support consideration and wonderments for communities to take. It is important to acknowledge the barriers that may emerge as we work toward trauma-informed community. Many people who could benefit most from a trauma-informed lens may struggle to engage with these efforts, as largely volunteer efforts may thwart engagement for those who don't have the privilege to do work without pay. Others who have been harmed by systems and/or historically marginalized may not want to engage in systems change efforts or trust that it is safe and worthwhile. For trauma-informed initiatives, we need to be intentional about engaging diverse lived experiences and intentional to reach out to diverse audiences. Creating a sense of belonging, which can only be done by really seeing, hearing, and valuing people over time, is critical to bridging existing gaps. For far too long, we have allowed the community fabric to fray, and it will take time to remend this, but trust is built through consistent action over time. Folks with a trauma history and trauma-impacted communities may not feel a meaningful sense of belonging to the community. These barriers require intention if we are going to engage in truly trauma-informed approaches. Generating a shared language and understanding about how trauma impacts individuals, families, and communities and systems is critical to supporting progress in this work. There is an important difference between community-based and community-led, where community-based is often an agency or organization that is located in and serves the community, but does not necessarily share decision-making with community members. We want to promote community-led, trauma-informed, prevention-oriented, resilience-building, and healing-centered practices. An abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset is most easily accessed through a sharing of resources, economic, social, and human capital, which can unlock a future-based orientation that builds a realistic sense of hope and helps keep this work going for the long haul. There are so many reasons, as discussed earlier, that trauma-informed approaches are necessary. The benefits can be widespread, from the individual level of self-efficacy and accountability and ownership, to the broader benefits of greater equity and justice and community connection and cohesion. There is a tremendous amount of research highlighting the epidemic of isolation and loneliness our country is facing. And trauma-informed approaches help to build a greater sense of community that serves as a powerful antidote to that. These benefits, and so many others, make this work necessary. In our report that looks at a number of different community change models, we find 9 common elements that create important considerations for building capacity and engaging communities in trauma-informed change. It is important to align the work with the priorities expressed by the community, while also being realistically adaptable and responsive to what may come up along the way. We know this work will change, emerge, and evolve in processes that layer and loop learning over time. While we would not achieve much if we were always changing our goals, we must also refrain from being overly rigid. A process orientation with specific short-term and intermediate goals provides a framework for action and reflection that ensures responsiveness while making progress. Outcomes are the product of a good process in systems thinking. This allows people to integrate principles within their loci of control that allows for sustainability and scalability of efforts as community continues to grow and evolve. We need to recognize that communities are living systems, which are both nested within larger systems while also having smaller microsystems that they impact. And these systems are constantly interacting with each other. Embedding the work in a more holistic vision beyond just individual and moral failings and models of mental illness is important to create a hopeful future. It is not an either or, but a both and, where individual capacity and contribution remains important while not losing sight of the interaction between all levels of our society, which helps to promote prevention and systems level work to promote the best outcomes possible when we work with families, institutions, and more. It's about healing harm where it's happened, not disrupting positive progress, and recorrecting where systems have failed and are failing to ensure that individuals and families and institutions, and therefore the community as a whole, can truly thrive. This work is about playing a long game, so we must give consideration to the multi-generational support that is necessary. We can not only support the next generation of adults and work to promote healthy childhood development in a vacuum. This work is critical, and also it's impacted by adults and young people's lives and the broader community at large today. We must recognize the significance of community context, create conditions of safety in all of its forms throughout the community, engendering trust in community members to promote well-being for everyone, establishing trust with systems to support the community at large. We do not need to wait for legislation to inspire action. There is work that can be done to support well-being today, which can also then increase the likelihood of legislation and other systems change efforts to further support and facilitate positive development within the community. One of the common pushbacks to trauma-informed work is that it can be seen as deficit-based. At a deep level, I personally do not believe that this is the case, as I see trauma-informed work about promoting well-being through an understanding of how we are impacted by eustress and distress, and working to promote treatment, intervention, and systems that promote healing and well-being. However, beyond what we decide to call this work, which is why in our report, we discuss community-led, trauma-informed, prevention-oriented, resilience building, and healing-centered, as we recognize that people prefer different language and all of those terms can fit into the framework that we are discussing. Centering approaches to mobilize existing capacities and resources is critical to creating conditions of empowerment, promoting senses of agency to enact change, and noticing and growing wisdom and strength in ourselves and others. This creates a sense of shared ownership and mutual commitment to achieve shared goals. This promotes a shift from a scarcity mindset and competition of resources to true collaborative efforts to promote thriving instead of merely surviving. Research shows that this connectedness and honoring multiple perspectives is critical in effective community transformation efforts. I see that something came in the chat. Reza, we'll please feel free to use the chat to interact with each other, ask any questions. I know that we will get to that at the end. I do not mean to ignore you. Education and training is also critical so we can act in alignment with what we know creates conditions of safety and empowerment, act on shared values, and hold accountability across various contexts. We encourage consideration for how to make these opportunities both ongoing and diverse. Many communities focus on only sharing these trainings with professionals, which is important, but creating opportunities like screenings of film and facilitated community discussions, community events that have training available, train the trainers across the community, are critical in embedding work deeper into the community and creating a process that can truly be community-led. Both formal and informal learning opportunities have power to make choices for ourselves and our communities to generate ongoing commitment and a sense of belonging. And it is critical in training to not mistake a single training session to be the end of the work or what creates trauma-informed care. We must emphasize in all trainings the process of learning and growth over time. Neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, which the term ACEs necessitates further exploration of the multiple realms of ACEs, as well as positive childhood experiences, and resilience is a helpful framing to show the universality of why trauma-informed approaches can be so powerful. We can look to near science to support each other noticing adaptivity and strength in bringing people together and engaging in this change work. From a neurological perspective, the N in near, when we are under overwhelming stress, our functional cognitive abilities drop. This is evolutionarily adaptive, as short-lived stressors for humans generally meant that we had to escape. And so the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint response that kicks in helps us survive short-term disasters and threats. But when that stress is prolonged, this evolutionary response can wreak havoc on our human systems. If we don't understand how trauma impacts us, we can see behaviors that we perceive as defiant or rude when through a trauma-informed lens, we understand that there is a great need for compassion. Epigenetics is an emerging field of science that shows how stress not only impacts ourselves, but can also make changes to our genes and be passed down to future generations. This may sound like it's just a bad thing, but it also gives us hope for multi-generational advancement. As we create healthier and less stressful environments and systems, we will promote healthier people for future generations, and the benefit of doing so will continue to ripple out over time. The original ACEs study looked at adverse childhood experiences, which show the powerful correlation of early childhood adversity and health and social outcomes throughout the lifespan. The multiple realms of ACEs have expanded beyond just adverse childhood experiences to include adverse community environments such as racism and violence, atrocious cultural experiences like genocide and war, and adverse climate experience such as hurricanes and wildfires. ACEs are not automatically traumatic, as trauma is in the perception of an event or series of events. But ACEs across all realms create multiple dimensions of common experiences that may be traumatic. And finally, resilience provides hope, not just to bounce back, as the general definition of resilience means in engineering or physics, but that we as humans have the capacity to withstand the stressors we face and to grow through them, with appropriate resources and supports, of course. The concepts of post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic wisdom, that through these experiences we can grow stronger and learn, brings hope to this work that we do. So as we organize in communities, keeping these various elements in mind is very important. This work that we do is far too frequently expected to be done by volunteerism, which is unfair and unsustainable. While many times we must start efforts through volunteerism or taking on additional work, which is exactly how CTIPP and other initiatives that I've been involved with launched as well. Finding opportunities to come together and conceptualize funding is critical for sustaining and scaling efforts over time. Looking at policy levers that can support initiatives, philanthropy, whether individual donors, foundations, or corporate giving, that will enable community-led work to proliferate, and other opportunities is an important consideration as we build out community frameworks. We need to ensure that funding does not take away from what the community truly wants or needs. So braiding and blending funding from a variety of sources over time can help to ensure power over ultimate decision-making is maintained at the community level, even with financial ebbs and flows. This is an ongoing process and is more difficult for some communities than others, depending on existing resources that can be tapped into. A part of the long-term work I am doing is around trying to create economic vehicles that allow us to share in the cost avoidance that is generated by this work, like what we saw in the Washington State example, to sustain and scale these initiatives over time. That is a long-term solution that I do hope emerges, and I believe that it will. But in the meantime, other conversation around funding is critical. Building resilience in communities has taken on an increasingly important role as we have seen the pitfalls of emergency response efforts at various levels. Supporting the expansion of an empirical understanding of what truly builds community leadership and participation helps ease the burden of needing to work through existing insufficient frameworks that currently exist. Community-based participatory research and empowerment evaluation can help communities feel like academics aren't just coming in and getting what they need and then leaving, but feel supported and heard to inform the important directions of this work. And finally, maximizing protective and resilience factors while mitigating risk and vulnerability factors allows us to zoom out to what we need to co-create the initiatives and efforts that will meet the complex needs of community members. The intentional reduction of fragmented care and service delivery brings about greater senses of community, agency, and better outcomes overall. Working to integrate, coordinate, and align across the various community resources now and in the future is necessary to heal the ways in which trauma has fragmented existing services and perpetuates adversity throughout the community. Bringing in diverse lived experience helps to bring about this change because we know that healing takes place in the context of healthy relationships over time. In addition to this report that I just went over, we have been leading work alongside the International Transformational Resilience Coalition and other partners to build population-level resilience using a public health approach to the impacts of disasters, namely the climate, ecological, and biodiversity crisis our society is facing that continues to generate stress and adversity throughout our society. This work is based on decades of research done by Bob Doppelt around the ecological crisis. In creating community-led approaches from resilience coordinating networks, which is what the ITRC calls community groups engaged in this work, there are recommendations around what a hub and spoke approach could look like as we promote widespread engagement in the development of community plans. There is some agreed upon executive committee and some co-chairs so that there is leadership with different suggestions of the community groups that should be engaged around that. Of course, this will look different from community to community based on populations and resources that exist across different communities. But these general groups give a good overview to think through what groups can be engaged, who can we reach out to. And then you will see that on the outside ring, there are a number of different teams and committees that can be created to lead different elements of this work. What is important is that it creates new and expanded ways to collaborate to address the ever-present stressors communities may face. In doing this work, there are 5 foundational areas that have been studied that build population-level resilience to the climate crisis that we train communities on. Building social connections across geographic boundaries, and as well as cultural and economic boundaries and others in the community, is the most important of the 5 foundational areas to build. Social connections are vital to address the toxic isolation and loneliness that is generating profound mental health problems today. Families, friends, and neighbors are as important, if not more important, than first responders during the first few days of a disaster, and often much longer. Social connections are particularly critical in times of crisis because they provide the emotional safety and practical support for health and resilience, and doing so can help people find meaning and purpose in their lives by assisting others. We must also ensure a just transition, which requires political pressure to transform systems as best as we can. As discussed earlier, we do not just want to build resilience that forces people to withstand the stress perpetuated by systems, but we also must work to reduce those systemic stressors at the same time, which is why we use the term transformational resilience. A core element of trauma-informed change is a common language and understanding about how we promote well-being, relying on understanding how stress and adversity impacts the human mind, body, and spirit. This helps people understand what is happening within and around them, which can normalize struggles, reduce stigmatization and the fear thereof, while building the knowledge and skills needed to prevent and heal their own psychosocial and spiritual struggles. Along those lines, we must also foster engagement in the practices that promote well-being, as active engagement can release trauma from the nervous system, which helps to prevent and heal traumas. This helps build social connection, which is one of the many ways that these 5 foundational areas are interactive. And last but not least, establish ongoing opportunities through mostly peer-led group and community-minded opportunities to heal traumas. These provide opportunities for people to come together and share about both the struggles they face as well as opportunities they see, and build an emotional safety net that allows for people to heal and remain resilient and adaptable. What we must recognize in a world that frequently works to treat problems we face with a prescribed medication or treatment, that so many of the deepest problems we face in this world we must get through together. We need each other to heal. It is through community, which can be defined in a variety of ways, from geographic to identity-based or otherwise, that we will find our ways out of the issues that our society faces. The principles shared today are hopefully helpful in some ways as you all move forward to build community capacity to work to promote healing and transformational resilience. I know that it is not easy. The work I do today is informed by work I did in Philadelphia communities at the beginning of my career. One initiative in particular, Love, which was run out of the community center that I worked at, specifically worked to develop a trauma-informed community coalition to address the deeper issues our community faced beyond the child care, teen programs, workforce development, and emergency services that we provided. What I shared today is in no way meant to portray this work as simple. These interconnected steps are never truly over. We are just constantly working toward better and learning along the way. But I do believe that it is some of the most critical and rewarding work that I have had the pleasure of doing thus far in my career. And I know members of the thousands of coalitions that do work along these lines feel similarly. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do to support each other, to support the communities that you live in, as we work together to make our world a better place. You can find the community change report that I presented on about at this QR code and link, and I'll put these in the chat afterward as well. And while you can find more information about the climate COP we do on our website, please know that more will be coming out about that work as we move forward. we have published CTIPP has published a variety of resources and reports and other resources that you can find and share for free in the Resource Center on our website. And again, I thank you so much for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing overview of the reports that you put together, and also the big picture of the complexity of the process that we are all dealing with. For the audience, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom system to ask questions. I also shared the resources, the city resources, in the chat for people to have access to, but I have a follow-up question related to that. Yeah, we learned a lot based on the report that you developed on community change, trauma-informed community change, but I see that there are lots of more reports in the website, and I would appreciate if you can walk us through what other more specific resources that are available for people to get access.
Yeah. So as you go through our website, there's resources on, what trauma-informed workplaces look like. We've done work around trauma-informed schools. There is work around women's health in particular, and what trauma-informed women's health looks like, which is a larger resource that admittedly has more about the general healthcare system beyond just women's health, but certainly has parts that are targeted toward women's health as well. There is support for what trauma-informed approaches to advocacy may look like. And again, we try to develop all of this to be action-oriented and also to understand that this work looks different in different places. And so, there's a lot of resources and more to come. I could go on about all the reports in our resource center, but do encourage folks to look through there. And if it's easier, because it can be overwhelming, and if you just go to the general resource center, which Reza, thank you for posting in the chat, you'll see, they're chronologically based at first, but there are different tags. So at the top of the website, if you're interested in a specific issue, you can search for specific keywords to see if we have reports on that.
Very good, thank you. I have a couple of more questions in the meantime that people are asking questions. One is about the notion of diversity within the communities. So from outside, communities seem so coherent that, like, again, this is a very consistent social system. But when you are a part of the community, or when you get more familiar with the complexities of the community, you realize that the nature of the trauma, the historical experience, or the political standpoint, etc., are diverse even within smaller communities. And basically providing a solution that people sit together and build relationship on a common trauma sometimes is not realistic. Did you have any experience with the diversity within the community and how to navigate this process?
Yeah, so it's incredibly complex, and I wish that I had the $1 million answer to the question, but acknowledging the complexity and understanding that sometimes there are underlying tensions that need to be addressed before we can simply have folks together in the same room is really important, right? Because again, we want to encourage and create conditions of empowerment and safety. We have had, I can tell you the best example that I had with this was dealing with the political turmoil currently going on in the United States. We did a moderation campaign, and the best, at a high level, thing that I can tell you without having the real answers, or all of the answers at least, is that a lot of times what goes on is that trauma begets more trauma, right? And so various groups can feel as though they have been harmed, and perhaps rightfully so, by the other. And a lot of times what happens is that, I'll use the word conspiracies, but really if you take it as a Brene Brown term of the story that we're telling ourselves about somebody else, the stories that different groups are telling about other groups may be perpetuating an inability to get together. And the stories may be so different that getting into the same room, you're not even having the same conversation. You're talking past each other because the frame of reference is so different, which is where being able to have those conversations, which may come in from having a few key members from different groups that are able to come in and see each other without bringing in the full group as a whole may be a good first step. And working to sort of acknowledge and understand the realities of what is driving such animosity across a community. It's a process and it takes time. A lot of times that's really one of the core traumas that needs to be addressed. And again, creating that shared understanding and language that allows for us to have conversation across our normal kind of scope of conversations is a really important first step to be able to begin to address the deeper problems that impact all of us.
Thank you. Also, as you were speaking, I was wondering who is best positioned to facilitate the process. So I understand that basically, like it is a facilitated process. We want the communities to rely on their strength. We want communities to connect. We want the communities to mobilize the resources that they have. But I suppose there is a need for some facilitation or basically a coherent big picture that basically there's a journey. Who is best positioned to facilitate this journey?
I mean, there are certainly a lot of folks who are paid to facilitate, right? And so there might be a number of organizations that what I'm about to say is not meant to exclude the fact that there are people who are experts in this work, who can support. One community that we saw, what they do is they do social network analyses. And what you find is that there might be a few people, probably not the expected community leaders who are usually a bit more isolated, but people who have connections with just dozens of people throughout the community, and they can immediately get folks to mobilize around specific talking points. And if you can find those people in the community, the people who can move the hearts and minds and who are deeply connected through long-term relationships with a lot of other people, that can have tremendous ripple effects throughout a community. We don't need to have just one community facilitated conversation. It would be impossible to have, that large of a conversation without having smaller micro conversations. And so finding those key community actors who are connected to folks throughout the community and are seen as leaders, whether that is a formal distinction or not, that is a really good place to start that we have found, especially when you're doing this on volunteer work and paid facilitators, like I've been in the place of, is just not in the question.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. There's a question in the QA I will read through. Thanks for this. It's so important. How do you cultivate buy-in for a community that already identifies itself as trauma-informed? For example, an organization that has a compassionate mission, but also a lot of stress and burnout and dissatisfaction.
An incredible question. I thank you for that. And I think, again, I will, do you mind if I share my slides really quickly? Sure. So again, I think that I should have just started this one over. But I think that a lot of times when people call themselves trauma-informed, just a personal sense like that, that's sometimes where the work stops. It's like, oh, we're trauma-informed. All right, we'll continue with everything else. But I have, or I should say, and also someone on my team is trying to get me to stop saying but because it invalidates everything that I said before. And I do not mean to invalidate what I said before. So, and also, I think that there is an opportunity when someone does call themselves trauma-informed to engage in the 6 principles that are widely agreed upon. And again, any other values that organization or community sort of says about itself. But to really engage in, if we are experiencing burnout, like, is there conditions of empowerment? Are we truly creating conditions of safety? And are there steps that we can take to continue to get better? I think that leaning into the 6 principles, a lot of times that are agreed upon when someone says we are trauma-informed, allows for us to acknowledge the work that's been done. We don't want to discredit that there have been attempts and work that has already been done, and also that there is work that can continue to be done to improve, because if we look at the outcomes, there's still trauma from what you're, from the example about burnout and stress. And so we can continue to create conditions of empowerment, voice, and choice to continue to make things better. We can continue to cultivate conditions of safety. Again, a lot easier, but I have found that anchoring in those values, and again, other values that might be within what an organization or community says, can be really critical to continue to cultivate buy-in over the long term.
Very good. Thank you so much. I see Anahita has a question.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for this great talk. So you mentioned something about how to create trust with the community and like different approaches that we may have. I think that's something that's very important, especially in some communities who are not really now engaged in some of these community-based interventions. What approaches do you usually recommend to create this trust with communities?
The only thing that I have found that is that consistently works across communities is that like it just can't be a short-term answer. I think that sitting down with people and getting to know the human side of them and what drives them and kind of cultivating that sense of connection, that builds trust. You know, different things build different elements of trust. I have seen communities that, like when we were working at the community center and I was starting the initiative Love that I discussed, I bought pizza out of my own pocket, and that won the trust of about 36 people that I was just willing to buy pizza, right? And granted, there's privilege associated with that, but 5 pizzas won a fair amount of trust, which then had ripple effects. There are others that maybe going to a sports game is what cultivates trust. It can look different depending on the context, but again, I think that at the core of it all, trust is built through relationships and not just a superficial sort of like, I'm going to like, we're going to go in, we're going to fix this. Anything that implicates we're here to fix you. We want to stay away from. We are here to engage in a process. We care about you. I want to get to know you. That seems to be the core element.
Yeah, that's very important. So it's kind of like, as you say, it's something, an element between individuals, like it's personal, relational. Do you have any experience with like online courses or online? It's like that personal, maybe.
Yeah, we've done a few, and I have made my fair share of mistakes doing online courses, especially during the pandemic. I think that the breakout room function can be wonderful to help cultivate connection, where again, that ripple effect of feeling connected, where even if every person feels connected to 2 other people in a room of 100 people, that can create a sense of community, right? And then I think making sure, like the other thing that I've seen in terms of, and I did a horrible job of this today, totally admittedly, but a lot of times Zoom becomes very pedagogical. Whereas I think that in-person sort of community environments are much more andragogical or a blend, where instead of just leading from the front and presenting slides and speaking at people, there is more time to work and process with. And so on our larger calls where we do try to have breakout rooms and have that individualized sense of connection, and then we'll bring back together to the larger group to try to synthesize key points, we generally have reflection time built in and other activities that help to integrate and synthesize the information instead of it just being like, as I've been told I do by many people, just drinking from a fire hose, where it's just so much information that you can't really capture onto all of it, can be really important.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have a last question. What is the role of academia in this? So I appreciate your comment about researchers going into the field and get what they want and go away, and the importance of CPPR and relevant approaches. But what is your experience working with academia on this and like they being a part of this change process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like academia has a really important role to play when it positions itself well, right? I do feel very strongly that I have seen academics do a fair amount of harm by, again, going in and making communities feel like almost lab rats in an experiment and then leaving without giving them actual solutions. You know, I've heard a lot of communities, ones that I've worked in and others that I've just spoken and met with, who do feel as though these researchers get $1 million grants that the community sees almost none of, for reports to be written about the community that highlight problems. And then they frankly leaves the community feeling more re-traumatized and traumatized than really helped out, regardless of what reports say. And so one role is, I think, academics cannot do that and really engage in research in humane ways. And then I do think that on a brighter side, and again, I'm about to go into a master, my second master's program, and so by no means am I totally against academia. I do think that there is a lot of expertise that exists in academia that can help synthesize a lot of community wisdom when the right questions are asked, and when we approach things the right way, that do create more of that empowerment development of an evidence base over time that isn't just synthesizing the same research that's already been published on to further publish, but rather is listening to indigenous wisdom that may never have been reported on, that may live within communities for thousands of years, that have helped promote healing before words like trauma-informed even existed in vernacular. And being able to then take that, synthesize it, develop a framework out of it. And importantly, when that is done on a policy and systems level side, it becomes much easier to communicate, get funding for, sustain the development of existing practices. And so I do think that there is a balance and a really important role for academia to play. I just do think that the methods in which academics go into communities needs to be done thoughtfully, as well.
Thank you very much, Jesse. That was an amazing talk. Thank you for sharing your insight and experience with us. We will upload this presentation along with the transcription on Kian Foundation's website, and I suppose people can reach out to you if they have further questions and possibilities for collaboration. So any last words before I advertise for the next webinar?
I spoke way more and wish that I had the opportunity to learn from all of you, as well, as I know that there's a lot of wisdom in this group. I just appreciate the opportunity, and it was a pleasure to spend a part of the day with you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for attending the webinar today. Just a quick note that the next session of the webinar will be by Dr. Ada Castro, which is titled Understanding and Targeting Social Environmental Trauma-Related Stress through Community-Based and Community Health Worker-Based Interventions in Puerto Rico. The talk will be on August 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern United States time. And I shared the link to the webinar series with the registration links on the webpage that you can basically register for the next sessions. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks again, Jesse, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.